Getting paid to travel the world and photograph motorcycles sounds like a pretty cush job, right? Well, it's more difficult than you think, especially when you're gasping for oxygen at 15,000 feet above sea level on a Tibetan plateau. Just ask Jeff Allen, the guy who's had that exact job with Cycle World for over 30 years. Starting out as a studio assistant, Jeff's taken a motorcycle to destinations you wish you could go, and to places that you never knew existed. From the Himalayas in Nepal to Baja California to the streets of Thailand, Jeff doesn't just document the adventure, he gets right there in the thick of it to capture the perfect photo. And when he's not the one behind the lens, you may be able to find him in the photo, on a motorcycle of course. And even though he's the guy with the packs stuffed to the gills with camera gear, he can keep up with the best of them. But even his photos of people on bikes a little closer to home captures the spirit of what makes motorcycling so special. The need for speed, a sense of adventure, and the pure, unadulterated fun you can only find on two wheels. This is Jeff Allen. I'm your host, Mark Long, and you're listening to Driven to Ride. Jeff Allen, you are on Driven to Ride. How are you, sir?
Hi. Good to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to have our little chat.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for being here. You are a legendary photographer in the motorcycle community, but I want to hear it from your words. What do most people know you for? What's kind of your claim to fame?
My claim to fame is I've been a motorsports photographer, both car and motorcycle for, it's embarrassing, I guess, to say, for over 30 years. But mostly I'm known for being the Cycle World guy. I've been at Cycle World that entire time, and I shoot a lot for them.
Okay, cool. And have you been a photographer for them the entire time, or have you kind of done some other jobs with them? Or
yeah, I started out working in the back then when magazines they shot film, and things were printed and then sent to the art department. I literally paste stuff up on the wall when I started. And so I started in the print room. I started in the dark room, processing film and printing. And then slowly they're like, hey, you can shoot this product. And they'd give me like a pair of boots or gloves, and I'd go in the studio and spend far too long, doing that than it probably took. But, that's how I started with the magazine, shooting, working through the camera. Holding the camera and looking at light, was in the studio shooting book reviews and gloves, basically.
Yeah, stuff that doesn't move, that you can place in perfect lighting and get the perfect shot that way. It sounds like.
Yeah, stuff that was unexciting, and someone else decided to let the new guy do it.
Well, you got to start somewhere, so.
And I was happy to do it.
Oh, I bet, yeah. How'd you get involved with Cycle World in the first place?
So I was doing that boring job for someone else prior. I was working in a black and white film processing lab. And again, working in the studio or in the lab, processing film and processing printing. But we did a lot of work for Disneyland, which is something I remember. And we had some work for automotive photographers. We had a few guys that came in. People were shooting film back then, and they would shoot both black and white and color. And we did their black and white, and I don't know. I just started to look around, and I liked. I found this job that was at our previous owner, the owner of the magazine, and I went in and I interviewed with my former boss, Brian Blades, who was. He was a great guy. I really enjoyed the interview. He was a great guy, and he obviously thought I was a good fit. Just stand in the dark and process.
Yeah. So you're originally from Southern California. You still live in Southern California. So there had to have been a lot. Like you said, you did work for Disney and then to Cycle World. I mean, you got a lot of cool companies and cool spots in one area. So
yeah. And it's funny because the office back then was in Newport Beach, and it was just a couple miles from my grandparents' house, and so that was kind of cool to go down there. And when I was young, I would go. My grandparents were still alive. I would go over to their house for lunch occasionally, and have lunch with the grandparents. Little tuna sandwiches cut into squares.
Nice. Yeah, the traditional
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
stereotypical lunch. So, well, how did you get into like motorcycles? You said you're kind of into cars and bikes kind of together. Did you grow up in like an automotive household or?
Yes, my dad was into motorcycles, primarily off road. He did some motocross racing and things like that. And there, in my family, there's four of us, four boys, and my older brothers both had bikes. And then about the time I was going to get a bike, I think my dad started doing the math, and he's like, I can't afford all these motorcycles. So uh, we sort of fell away from the motorcycles at about the age I was about. I don't know. It's probably about 6 or 7. Because then I had a younger brother also coming. My dad's like, that's a lot of work and expense. So it wasn't until I don't know. I must have been 15 or 16. I bought a used bike from a neighbor, and dirt bike, and I would ride that thing. I grew up in Anaheim Hills in Orange County, and back then there were still a lot of hills, not so many houses. And I would just after school, I would just go home and I would jump on that thing and I would ride it up into the mountains and onto what is private property, but they mostly looked the other way and allowed people to do it. So uh, uh, that's how it all started. And then the idea of working for Cycle World and Road and Track, it wasn't so much I was excited about working in motorcycles. I was actually excited about working in photography. That was my first joy was photography, and the fact that I rode and did all those things, it really came together for me.
Yeah, yeah, it really, really did. You kind of lucked out there.
For sure, I lucked out.
When you first started riding motorcycles, was there like a moment that you have in your head that you knew like you were hooked and you'd be riding the rest of your life?
I I think so. I, when I was in high school and I would ride around and I was just like riding my dirt bike. I was like, I don't know, I was like the kid on the Bad News Bears or whatever. I was riding around my dirt bike in a leather jacket, no helmet, stuff like that, like just foolish stuff. And yeah, that was pretty cool. And then when it came together with working at Road and Track and Cycle World, and I had access to all this stuff. I was like, this is a cool thing. This is something I'm gonna do for a while,
And you're still doing it.
and I'm still doing it.
Well, let's switch gears a little bit. How did you get into the photography side of things?
So that's a funny story. So when I was about 13 years old, there was a TV commercial for a coffee company, and I remember it as being MJB, but I've tried to find the commercial. I'm not sure that was the brand, but I was just watching TV, and there was a TV commercial of a guy who was a photographer, and he was walking like through this farmland, countryside at sunrise, and he's click, 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 click,
Yeah.
and he's got his dog with him, and the woman, this older woman, walks out of the house he's photographing. And, you could tell in the commercial they have like a little conversation and he does a couple more photos. And then they just go inside. She offers him a cup of coffee. And I'm like, well, that seems like a cool job. I should consider that. and that's where it got started. After that, I started high school and I just started taking photography courses. I've been doing it ever since. The silly little coffee commercial. And I'm still drinking coffee.
What kind of subjects did you start photographing?
As early, it was landscape stuff. I would take my cameras to the beach. I had girlfriends who would go with me, and we would go off. Look for shots like we had some oak trees and things like that. Just looking, playing with the light, seeing what that was. Honestly, what I was looking for is like how to photograph the light.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and again, Southern California, you got a lot of beautiful light to play with, a lot of beautiful sunsets, a lot of hills. I mean, between that and riding motorcycles through the mountains in Southern California, I mean, what was that like? I mean, sounds like it was like the golden age of living there.
Yeah, it's funny because when we moved to Anaheim Hills, I was not riding. I was about the time my dad was selling my older brother's bikes, but my dad was riding.
Yeah.
He never stopped. So part of the reason we moved there is he could ride at that time. He could ride his dirt bike straight out of the driveway and up into the hills. So it was kind of a golden era, you know. It was in the 70s, you know, like on any Sunday and all that stuff. And not many of the other dads rode. So I remember we back then, you know, as a kid, you could just leave the house and be gone. You know, we would be gone, you know, 8, 10 hours.
Yeah.
Nobody even thought to go look for you.
Gone all day.
Yeah. So a couple hours before sunset, my dad would ride his dirt bike out, and he'd be like, tell me and my brothers, like, hey, it's time to get home. And he would just ride home. It was, yeah, it really was a golden era. I can still picture myself riding on that ranch. You know, there were cattle around and things like that.
Oh, wow.
And I wasn't going fast, but I was just, you know, it was something I was doing, and I would go by myself. I would just go and spend hours up there cruising around, checking stuff out, checking out new views, considering like, does this connect to that, and you know, go do all that.
Yeah, just exploring. How did you make the transition over to street motorcycles?
That was at Cycle World.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, when thankfully I sort of graduated out of the studio, and we were pretty busy back in that was in the early 90s. We were pretty busy. We were a photography department, and we serviced a handful of magazines, including Cycle World, the old magazine, Cycle magazine,
Okay.
Road and Track, and then Road and Track published monthly like special editions. So there was four photographers that worked in this department, and it just became so busy. We all were doing everything all the time. So that's how I got into shooting street bikes. They'd be like, go out and do this. And then riding was natural. There are press units available for both on the car side and the bike side. And they're like, hey, if you need to borrow something, talk to this guy. You know, and they're a little bit, with the motorcycles, they're a little bit reluctant at first. And like, they don't know you. Dude, are you going to bring it back, you know, unscathed?
Right.
So, but then I worked for one of the magazines we published there was a travel magazine. It was a motorcycle travel magazine. And that's when I really started riding quite often, because that to work on that magazine, most of the time it required you to ride and to be, you know, proficient, spend, you know, many days in the saddle. So that's where the street bike side came from.
Almost from necessity, it sounds like.
Well, sort of, yes, but as a desire, because there were other guys who could step up, and I was like, I'll do that. I was always the guy who said, what is it? I'll do that.
Yeah.
I'll do that. You know, get up early or
say yes to everything that comes your way.
Totally. That is exactly what I said.
So had you been a big traveler before working for the travel magazine, or is that something you kind of grew into?
Yeah, I also grew into that. Like I said, I've been lucky, you know, like all this stuff was just presented to me that I wasn't really, at the time, I wasn't really searching for. And yeah, as a kid, we went on family vacations, but they were simple. You know, we would vacation down in Newport Beach, where the office used to be. We would vacation down there. My mom would rent a beach house for 2 weeks, and, you know, with another family, and we would just go down there. And the dads didn't even show up during the week. They still worked, and they would show up on the weekends only. And so it was just the moms and the kids. And so we didn't travel a lot. And then with that travel magazine, that was like it literally just opened my eyes to the world.
Sure. Do you remember the first place that they sent you?
Yeah, I do. I remember we went to the Alps. We went to the Swiss Alps, and and for 2 weeks. Yeah. That was my first foreign assignment. That was the first time I traveled for work outside the country.
Okay.
They sent me to the Swiss Alps, and I rode a Harley Davidson, a Springer Softail, through the Swiss Alps with a group of people, and shot that. And that was, you know, that was amazing, because at that time there was no European Union. So all the countries were on their own. They were on their own currency. Every time we went from Germany to Switzerland, all this stuff, you had to show your passport. So there's all this passport control. And I don't know, I loved it. I loved switching them. I loved changing money. I actually kind of loved the complexity of making a phone call home. Like, you had to get just like a handful of coins, just feed them in there. The whole thing, I just dug it.
Yeah. I mean, everything's a little bit, there's a couple extra steps when you travel internationally. Even still now, I mean, you have the they don't check your passport as often. You have a credit card that basically works everywhere, but everything's still got an extra little layer of complexity, which makes it extra worth it, I think,
Yeah, just reading street signs and things like that. You go to foreign countries where they don't use English signs, like, wonder what that is.
Yeah, what am I getting into? So, so then, traveling and getting into all that, is that kind of how you got to, like, obviously into adventure riding and all that then too?
I guess that just kind of came together with riding. I love riding off road. Adventure bikes was just a natural thing for me because I like spending like long days on the motorcycle. So combining long days and dirt bikes, or at least the option to go off road, which is the thing about adventure bikes. You spend a lot of time on the pavement, but you can shortcut something or just make the whole day on the off road. And I worked with a photographer. I worked with a rider, a journalist at Cycle World early in my career, Jimmy Lewis, and he could see the value because generally the photographers don't ride back then for sure.
Okay.
So it was always wherever you could drive a car to, that had to be the location. And he had these ideas of having photo locations, out where he was riding. He's like, oh, this would be great to get shots here or shots there. So he essentially trained me. He's like, let's go get on this bike. And he wasn't, I wouldn't say he wasn't particularly polite. he, in the beginning, he was like, oh, you're such an idiot. Like, what are you doing?
Sure.
Kind of a thing. And then as we did it more and more and more, and I got better and better. I remember we were riding, we were doing a travel story off-road. We were riding from the Mexican border near Tecate to the Canadian border across the U.S. at Coeur d'Alene.
Oh, cool.
And it was like 10 days.
Yeah.
And we had a couple of riders join us along the way. Those were his riding partners. And one day it was just the two of us. And I think we were behind schedules. We were trying to make up some time and we weren't stopping a lot for photos. And we were just kept the pace up. And at the end of the day, like this was a wild compliment for Jimmy. He said, today you weren't a total idiot.
Not terrible. Well done.
Yeah. So, and I like to harass. We're friends. We've been friends, for years since that trip. Honestly, we were prior to that, we were just co-workers.
Yeah.
And on that trip, we became friends, and I like to bring that up now and then.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And there's nothing like a motorcycle trip with somebody that really kind of creates that special bond. I've got a couple of those that, kind of friends for life, even if you don't talk to them every day or anything like that, you kind of have that bond forever.
Yeah. If you're on a motorcycle for any, lengthy period of time, you will have an issue. You will have to struggle with something, whether it's weather or running out of gas, or if it's just as simple as a flat tire. Problem solving is, all part of it. And the two of you work it out and makes for good stories.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember I was riding with a friend of mine and we had just gotten to our campsite and he had taken his boots off, but we didn't have any cell service. And I was like, look, I gotta call my girlfriend, now wife but girlfriend at the time. And so I got to ride back to, a little bit of place with cell service, and you might want to do the same. And he's like, well, man, I just took my boots off and blah, 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 blah. And I finally convinced him, and I could tell he was not happy about it, but his girlfriend was happy. My girlfriend was happy or whatever. And we were at a kind of a rest stop, and I said, all right, come here. So I bought him an ice cream cone and he felt better. So that was kind of it's a good way to kind of placate the mood a little bit sometimes after taking all your gear off and then having to put it back on just to go make a phone call. So
yeah, that is kind of a big ask. Once the gear comes off, it's hard to put it back on, especially if it's sweaty.
Yeah.
When I ride off road and even on adventure bikes, if I ride with a heavy boot, if we're going to be off road, I always wear my knee braces. And if you wear those things all day long, they're so uncomfortable. And I sometimes joke that I think that the only reason I do ride motorcycles is because it feels so good to take the braces off.
Yeah. The relief after a long day and just being able to be comfortable and lay there and not have to worry about anything.
Yeah, it's nice.
You mentioned the Mexican border a bit. You've spent a fair amount of time in Baja. Tell me kind of how you got maybe your first trip to Baja, and what makes you keep going down there.
Oh, my first trip was exciting. My first trip to Baja was with a good friend of mine I grew up with. He rides motorcycles just a little bit, but we grew up in elementary school and middle school and
Yeah.
high school, and we decided to go down there. We drove my car. At that time I had a 1966 Volkswagen Bug, sort of the blue green Bug,
Yeah.
and we drove down, and I think we were 16. I think we were 16, and at that time it was pretty easy for us to go into a bar and get a beer and stuff. So in Mexico, I think the
Right. Right.
drinking age
Right.
was 18, but there was a lot of wiggle room there. And so uh, we stopped in Tijuana. We thought that was a good idea. We were headed to Ensenada, which was another maybe, I don't know, it's maybe about an hour and a half south. And it was nighttime. We stopped in Tijuana and we went to a couple bars, and then we turned out we closed the bar. So now we're leaving Tijuana. It's like 2 a.m.
Yeah.
And now we're going to drive down this dark road in Mexico down to where we're going. And on the way, I was driving. He was sleeping in the passenger seat, and then suddenly we were both sleeping in the front seats.
Oh no.
And crashed the car.
Oh.
Crashed the car into a ditch. Yeah. And both of us were uninjured, but the car was in bad shape. And so, we didn't, again, like problem solving. Now we're standing there, middle of the night, and a truck comes by, like a Toyota pickup truck, 4-wheel drive, American guy. And he's like, he could see we're stuck. So he just by chance, he had a tow rope. He pulled the thing out of the ditch, put it on the side of the road.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't drivable. So we jump in the back of the truck, and he just takes us the rest of the way. We get a hotel, and in the morning, my buddy, who was Todd looks out the window, and there's like a little wrecking yard across the street from our hotel.
Yeah.
So we walk over there. We talk with a couple of guys. They decide they're going to help us, and we knew that we had ruined 2 of the wheels, flatted them, and squared them. So he gathered up the stuff that he thought we needed, and we drove back out there. It was a good like 45 minutes outside of town, and he brought him out there, and he discovered that the drums where you would mount the wheels, the drum brakes, and the drums themselves were cracked and through the lug holes. So he's like, but it's Mexico, and so he's like, oh, no problem. So he takes a little rock and he starts like shaving these little pieces of aluminum out of like beer cans and soda cans, and he starts threading them into the lug holes.
Yeah.
And keeps threading them in there until they would stay. And he did that on both wheels. And then I forget what we paid him, but it was almost nothing.
Yeah.
Like he did all this stuff. It was hours worth of work. He got those wheels for us. It had tires on it. And I think we gave him a total of $40.
Wow.
Like for the job, the ride, the wheels, everything. It was like $40. And so of course Todd and I, it was like the first day. So we're like, well, we ended up driving it back further into Mexico, the car.
Let's keep going. Yeah.
And we're like, the weekend's just started. So we stayed, and on Sunday we made the long journey home. That car was in sorry shape, and we got it home, but not just barely.
Man, that's a hell of an adventure.
Yeah. So that was the first trip. And I've been down there, probably dozens and dozens, hundreds of times. And, something doesn't always go wrong, but things go wrong, and it's, part of the fun.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we've talked a little bit that you said you've taken motorcycles down there, as well. I remember you told me that you had a ridiculous story about your son from one of the more recent trips.
Yeah. Yeah. So, my son, Evan, who works with me at Psych World, and he's sort of my primary photo model now. We do a lot of trips together,
Okay.
Even a lot of photo shoots
Yeah.
together. And we were down there doing an off-road comparison story. And we were headed to this place. It's a little oasis near, sort of in the middle of the peninsula. And we were in the middle of nowhere. And we were in this little town, which is pretty remote, by like as far as help. Like if you need medical help or you need help fixing machinery, you're gonna struggle finding help. And I told him and one of the other guys that was with us, I said, okay, today's not the day to make any big mistakes. And he's like, yeah, I got it. So I said, okay, let's go. And so we're going, and I'm looking. We got to do a couple of photos before we get the bikes too dirty. So I'm looking for a little location that we can just pop off the pavement and shoot the statics and the details of these things. And while I'm looking, he's goofing around behind me. He's doing a wheelie, and he crashes doing a wheelie. I just had the conversation about don't screw up today.
Yeah.
That conversation is about 5 minutes old at this point.
Oh, jeez.
And I just hear in my head, my helmet, I hear that. I turn around, he's on the ground, and his gear's all torn up, and the bike's it's all scratched on one side. And I'm like, what? Like, we just talked. He's like, I didn't, and he's got all those excuses. So we end up, we get the thing off the road, and we shoot the statics of that bike and the other two bikes. And I'm like, okay, now we're going to go to a really remote place. We're headed out to the oasis, and the plan is to spend the night out there. See, there's water in the oasis that it's deep enough you can swim in, clean enough that you can swim in, most times of the year. And we go out, and it's a pretty rough trail. We're going, and you can almost see the water. Like you can see all the palm trees that are growing around it and all this.
Right.
And he just jumps off this little rock and crashes right in front of me. And just as kind of a small tip over, really, nothing serious. And he gets up and he says his leg is sore. Me and one of the other guys were like, "You're fine." We tell him, "Just walk it off.
Yeah,
You'll be fine." We're basically here. It's right there. It's a half a mile away or a mile away. And he's like, "I think I broke it." We're like, "You didn't break it." So he's really struggling, and so we're like, "Okay, well, let's just spend the night here next to there's an abandoned mission. There's an old, I think it's about 300-year-old Spanish mission that sits next to this oasis."
Cool, yeah.
And we're like, okay, we'll spend the night here. We'll go down to the water in the morning. And so he spent the night there. We had brought in some wood to burn. So we had a fire, had this stuff, and we just said, keep the boot on, sleep with that boot on all night. And in the morning, we'll check it. So we check it, and he's really uncomfortable.
Okay.
He can't walk. We're like, okay, well, can you stand on the pegs? He can't ride the motorcycle because he can't stand up. And this was not an easy place to get to. There were a couple of like sort of on the road, there were a couple of like what you call like dry waterfalls. So these like downhill.
Oh, sure.
You have to go back up.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not doing it sitting down. And so we came up with a new plan. We're not going to the oasis. We got to get this guy out of here.
Yeah.
And so somebody's going to have to ride him out 2 up. And so they're like, "You're his dad. You're doing it." So I go, okay. So now we have a spare motorcycle. We take it, we throw it in, we hide it in some bushes, down by the creek.
Yeah.
And he jumps on the back with me, and I ride him out. And it was pretty uncomfortable because with the two of us on there squishing the suspension.
Yeah.
He has to, like, his feet would drag. So he has to hold his feet up. And it's over 20 miles out to the pavement.
Okay.
Where we're like, that's the spot we're trying to get to now.
Yeah.
Get back to the pavement. And it's all rocks. It's all like it's all rocks and sand, like baseballs, and those waterfalls. So we get him up that stuff, and as we're going, sometimes his legs just get a little tired, and it clipped the toe. He would clip his toe on a rock on that broke, and it turned out his leg was broken, and he would be screaming. He would be jamming his chin bar into like the back of my back because just trying to
just grit it through. Yeah.
And, and so we stopped a handful of times. It took hours to get him out of there. And then we had to go get the bike. and that we left in the bushes. So I put another guy on the back, and we rode back in and got the bike, and then we rode back out. And after took maybe like 6 hours to do the whole thing.
Oh God.
And and we hadn't even done the photo shoot. So we still had work to do.
Jeez.
So we bought him down in Mexico and get like these really big Advils. And so we bought him a package of Advil and a like a 12 pack of Tecate. And we parked him in a hotel room and said, "We'll see you in a couple of days." And so we went out and we did the photo shoot, and we came back for him. I remember because we had parked it extra. Now we had, his motorcycle. We parked it in the hotel room with him, and we come back. I remember him with these empty beer cans in the room, and he's watching some like old Western movie. At this point, we still had to get from there to where we had parked the vans.
Okay.
But there was a simple route, but it was still about 60 miles of some pavement, but mostly a pretty nice dirt road. So we put him back on the motorcycle, and he rode back to the vans, and that still wasn't the end of it because we still had to get him home,
right,
to see a doctor.
Wow.
And put him in the van, drove him back to Orange County, went to Mission Viejo Hospital, and it was late at night by the time we got there. And I remember we went into the emergency room, and they did all the stuff. They did the X-rays, and the doctor comes in, and she's looking at his X-rays, and of course, they have all the questions for him.
Where were you? What are you doing?
Okay, so how did this happen? Yeah, how did this happen? When did it happen? All the stuff. So he's like, "Oh, crashed my dirt bike in Mexico." She's like, "Oh, okay." And she goes, "When did this happen?" He says, "Saturday." And she's like, "Okay." And she goes, "Oh, wait, it's it was like, I think now it was Monday. It was almost Tuesday morning. It was late Monday."
Okay.
She's like, "Where have you been?" Like, we were busy. We were working.
Mexico, man.
Yeah. So it turned out he had broken his tib fin.
Okay.
And, it took him a little while to get over that.
I was going to say he's back. He's up to 100% now, right?
Yeah. He's had some other get off since then. So that's not even his most recent recovery, but yeah, he's fine.
Well, broken legs and crashed Volkswagens aside, what makes Baja so fun for you? Why do you keep going back?
Well, there's a combination of two things. I mean, it's very desolate, but there's also fairly easy to get around and discover and learn new places because there's dirt roads, but there aren't a ton of them.
Okay.
Like if you go to California desert and you start going out, and there's a dirt road option all the time. And so it takes a while to learn that. And you get down into Mexico and you get to these areas, you're like, "Oh, I remember this road," and so you're still out in the middle of nowhere. It's desolate, but you're like,
right,
I'm not lost. And even if you are lost, I always say you're not really lost if you still have fuel.
I like that.
If you still have gas in the machine, you're not lost. And so if you go and if you're on something that's new to you and you find a new road, you're like, well, it goes somewhere. Like these roads exist for a reason. It goes somewhere. And if we have gas, it's an option. And I just like to explore that way. I like just see what we see, do what we do, see what we see.
Find some stuff. Yeah.
Find some stuff.
Are there any maybe misconceptions or things about Baja that would surprise most people, you think, or that somebody hasn't been there?
Yeah, I think most people consider it, dangerous or full of outlaws. And it's not like that. The people of Baja are fantastic. And, we tell these stories. Well, they've all had similar stories. They've all had a time where they drove the truck into a rut, or their car just broke down, or whatever it was. They've all had these things. They've all lived through it. So when they see someone who needs help, they're happy to help. I mean, they're more than happy to help. We've had times down there. We were down there. And we had a side-by-side. I think we had gotten 2 flats. So we had a flat, and we changed it out. And we got a second flat. So now the spare on the back is flat. And we come up with the plan. We're going to pull one of the wheels off and take it into town. There was a town maybe 20 miles away. And in our group, we were mostly on motorcycles. The side-by-side was driven by a video guy. We were shooting video down there. We were down there working.
Yeah.
And one of our guys was separated from us on the motorcycle. He was separated from us, and he had the wrench to get the wheel off. He had the lug wrench, because you sort of share the load.
Right.
You don't have just one person carry the tool, and you certainly don't all carry the tools. You don't all carry everything. If you're going to be together, share the load. So I don't remember how he got separated from us. And I think actually he had a flat as well. So while we're waiting, these guys pull up and they want to know what the problem is. Can they help? And we show him we don't have the lug wrench. And he goes, well, I have one here, like in Spanglish, I don't speak Spanish. I mean, I speak Spanglish. I can, order in a restaurant and, things like that, ask for a restroom. And we're like, okay, well, we're going to need to go, change the tire, come back, put it back on, whatever. And he's like, no problem. We can't stay. He says, just leave it right here. He says, just put it in just put the wrench in that bush right there and I'll get it later.
Jeez.
And so he just loans out his tools and to some strangers and then leaves and trusts that we will leave that tool there for him as we did. And everything worked out perfectly. Yeah.
Yeah. That's probably something that maybe you wouldn't find as much in America, that trust and that friendliness to strangers. Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's because we don't struggle as much, right?
Right.
Like you're down there, and I love life in Baja, and I love the people down there. I just really do. I love to be down there.
From hearing you tell stories about it, it sounds like a magical place. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah, and especially when you get to some of these, like some of the true magic is when you find yourself in those remote places at the end of the day in the sunlight, or the like the reward is a simple meal. It's fantastic, but it's just a simple taco meal and a cold beer. It's nice.
Yeah. Well, Mexico and Baja isn't the furthest you've traveled in your adventures. You've been to Thailand. You've been to Nepal. I think pretty recently. Nepal.
Yeah, Nepal was fantastic. And this was something that came up through work. When I was in Thailand, that was it was a motorcycle trip, but it was just a vacation I did with a buddy and my older son.
Okay.
And Nepal was work, and it came up. I was on a sort of a press launch it was a press event for Royal Enfield.
Okay.
And they had us fly into Kathmandu, which was cool. I mean, it's a filthy, filthy city. But then we got out of Kathmandu, about a 2-day ride, and we got up into the Himalayas, and we were visiting this ancient but also very remote little village called Lomantan. And it's only been since like the mid 90s that foreigners could even visit this place. And about that same time is when the road went in. Prior to that, it was just a horse trail way up into the mountains. Yeah. And so it was fantastic. I thought I love to see stuff that's really foreign to me. That's what, I guess my love of travel is. I like to go places where, maybe could make you uncomfortable.
Sure.
Off topic a little bit. When the first time I went to Ireland, I was a little disappointed because it was so easy.
Oh, really?
Like it was easy. Like everybody spoke English. It was easy to order. It was easy to find a hotel. All this stuff.
You're comfortable, yeah.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, comfortable. I was like, I kind of expected more. So, like when you go to these other places, it's so foreign. It's so different, and that's what I loved about it. And again, the people of Nepal, Buddhists, very, very kind, very, very friendly, helpful, really nice.
Yeah, and the article that you wrote about it made you feel like you were there. I mean, riding through these streets and then on this road all the way up there to, I think you called it the like a forbidden city, pretty much.
Yeah, it was the Forbidden City. That's yeah. The foreigners were not permitted until it was in the mid '90s or so. And now, even still, there's a limited number. You have to have a travel permit
Oh
to
wow,
go up to the city.
yeah,
So they only issue so many permits per day.
sure,
You can go for multiple days, but it accumulates, and you get there, and the town is actually the day that we got there was the first day the town had electric lights in the square in the town at all, like other than inside the buildings, but in the outdoors in the walkways
yeah.
was it was all prior to that. It was just candlelight. That's what lit the streets.
I was gonna ask, was it like a time warp going to this town or this city?
It was because it's a walled-in city, and so that's it's not built for cars because when it was built there were no cars, just animals.
Yeah,
Animals was the only form of transportation, and it was a time travel. It was fantastic. It and again, it felt so foreign, and not many people spoke English,
yeah,
and you weren't sure where to eat or these things, because a lot of them, sometimes you go to these little places and the restaurants, it's just like a kitchen that's attached to someone's house.
right, right.
So it's not like a restaurant like here where there's a menu and everything. It's just, you just walk in and they live there, and here's a table and they'll serve you. And we there were a couple of like more traditional restaurants, but we went into those places, and we had some meals there. We would go in the morning and get coffee, things like that. It was fantastic. So foreign.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Have you had that feeling anywhere else in the world that you've been?
Yeah, I did a trip where we rode from Southern Europe. We went across the Straits of Gibraltar on a ferry, and we went into Northern Africa, into Morocco.
Okay.
And that, to a Western eye, that felt really foreign. It was so different, and it was fantastic. And uh, we went to Morocco. It was quite a while ago, and it was as we went through these towns. We visited like a sort of a mountainous town,
Yeah,
and like you would expect, it's a little bit more backward, or a little bit more um, simple.
sure.
And like you would find that here. Like if you went into a small desert town in California, it's not it's not anything like Orange County. And so we did that, and then as we went down, it's still, you recognize it as a city. Like when we got to Casablanca or Marrakesh. Marrakesh was awesome, with the plaza there with
Yeah, yeah,
all the street performers, and it it was crazy. It really was, and we so foreign, so foreign.
yeah, yeah. That's cool. So with these big trips, or even like a trip down to Baja, like, how do you prepare for a big trip like that? How do you carry all this camera gear that you got to take with you? I mean, like the logistics of it. How do you manage all that?
Yeah, yeah. The camera gear. Yeah, sometimes the camera gear is overwhelming. My camera bag that I wear on my backpack is about 45 pounds, and
Jeez.
that doesn't leave room. Yeah, and it doesn't leave room for any incidentals. Like you can't bring even extra socks and underwear in your camera bag. It's full.
Yeah,
So I have luggage, either like depending on the trip, there'll be hard luggage or soft luggage. And you still have to be pretty selective. So on one side, depending on how many people are in the group, if it's a big group, I won't carry too many tools or inner tubes or anything like that.
sure.
But in a small group, I still got to carry some stuff. So you got to carry tools, you got to carry tubes, you got to carry water, you got to carry a little bit of food in case you get stuck uh, overnight somewhere. So that just leaves one little place for like some extra socks and underwear. So you're very selective, and it takes a little practice. The first bunch of times you do it, you bring, too much of something you don't use and not enough something you need more of. And so after a while, you get it narrowed down.
Yeah.
And you get the proper, I have, good stuff I get from Giant Loop for soft luggage. And that stuff is really handy.
Yeah, because with like if you don't know, like traveling with photography gear, I mean, it's not just like a camera. Like you've got cameras and you've got lenses and you've got flashes or lighting that just scratches the surface of my limited knowledge of photography. I mean, and all of that stuff adds up to probably, like you said, I mean, multiple dozens of pounds, and you've got to carry it one way or another.
Yeah. Because you have a camera and you have a spare camera and you have spare batteries. Because it's easier to carry spare batteries than to carry the battery charger. My camera battery charger is big, even though it's lighter. There's a difference. It takes up room rather than weight. It's a handful sometimes. Sometimes it's a handful. If we do something that's really, really tricky, as far as the riding, we did a trip a few years ago. We went to Utah and we rode 5 miles of hell. It's exceedingly difficult. It's a hard trail.
Lives up to the name.
Yeah, I was not excited about carrying that whole pack, and so we had. I think there was, including myself, I think there was 4 of us in the group.
Okay.
So I spread some of my camera gear through the group. You get a camera body, you get 2 lenses, you get the camera batteries, and I'll carry the stuff that I'm using, consistently.
Yeah.
But for the spares, I had to spread it out.
Well, let's talk about the photography part a little bit. I mean, carrying it is one thing, but using it and setting up for shots, you've talked about it a little bit. But I've noticed, like, on your Instagram, you just seem to be in the right spot at the right time to capture like these great shots in motion, these action shots, like kind of people doing wheelies or hitting these trails. How do you go about doing that? How are you in the right place at the right time, seemingly every time?
Well, I've been very lucky. I've worked with some really, really great people, both who have mentored me, when I was younger, who said, look for this, do this, and they would look through my photo shoots and say, do more of this, less of this, this works, this didn't, kind of thing. And been very lucky to have fantastic photo models, the guys who ride the bikes. I've worked with some really great people. So sometimes, I ask them to do something, sort of ridiculous. And they're like, yeah, I can do that. And I'm like, that's great. But because they're so good, sometimes I don't even think to ask them something. And they're like, what if I do this? Like, they're creative on the motorcycle.
Sure.
And they said, what if I do this? Or what if we do that? And I go, okay. Then we use our like, now we use both of our expertise. You said you can do that. If you can do it over here in the good light, we're going to be solid. So it's a collaboration many times. The rider tells me what he can do or whatever, and I say, try it over here where the light's better, and put the camera here. So I've been very lucky, I would say, to have those good people, and I still do.
So you almost kind of make the right place at the right time with the right lighting, almost.
Often, yeah. Often that's what we do. It is a making. It feels like when you go shoot a photo shoot, and it's for a story, you're actually building something. Like you come to a place and you're like, okay, if we do this, this will work for the lead. Because it has these, these things about the image that are either we want to show or to draw someone in with the right lighting or something.
Sure.
And it feels like we're building something, and we make it. And then when it's done, it's like this, it's its own little project that we did together, and I think that those guys like to see themselves doing wheelies in the good light in the exotic locations and stuff like that. And I like this, and I feel it makes me feel good to do that.
Yeah, no, for sure. And yeah, if a world-class photographer came to me and said, I want to take pictures of you looking cool on your motorcycle, happy to oblige.
Yeah. And sometimes I ask them to do stuff because it'll work for the photo, but they feel weird or awkward. Like they're their style doesn't feel right or whatever. And I say, look, trust me. And
Yeah.
now with the digital, I can show them on the back. I said, and so they'll do it. And they're like, ah. And I go, this is what it looks like. They go, okay, we could keep doing that.
Worth it. Yeah. So I got to ask, do you shoot like while you're on the motorcycle or while riding at all? Is that something you've learned to do, or is that not ever a thing?
You mean like from the seat of the motorcycle?
Yeah.
While I'm moving?
Yeah.
Yeah. A few times I've done things like that. It's pretty difficult because, you know, the rule of motorcycle, like you go where you look.
Yeah.
So I found, like, if you look this way and you're looking at the guy, you start creeping into him. And so, I've done it in certain locations, and I'm aware that we might run into each other. So I try to, you know, look up before that happens.
Yeah. Only in special circumstances, it sounds like.
Correct. Yeah. To actually be looking through the lens. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So what about motorcycles and traveling and all this? What makes it doing all this on a motorcycle so special to you?
So what is special to me is that it never feels like work. It never feels like work. It really doesn't. My dad, when I was a kid, and I try to tell my kids the same thing. My dad always had this thing. He says, if you find a job that you love, you'll never work a day in your life.
Right.
And I mean, it sounds cliche, but it's actually true. And I remember when he would say that, I was like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, I didn't even know what that meant, you know, for the longest time. And that's what's special. I honestly, I've been doing it for 30 plus years, and I love it now as much as I've loved it ever. And I love all the things about it. I love getting up early in the morning and driving to locations. I love getting home late. It doesn't matter if the location is, you know, half a day's drive, and then we turn around and come home afterwards, which I've done a number of times. It's all the things. I love all of it. It just never really feels like work. And so I even say that this job is great. It sure beats working for a living.
Love it. I love it. Well, I think that's a perfect way to wrap up. So Jeff, it's been great. Thank you for sharing your stories with us. Sounds like you're kind of living the full life every day, which is great to hear, and documenting it.
Well, thanks, Mark. Thank you. Thank you for having me, Mark. It was nice meeting you.
Thanks for listening to Driven to Ride. Interact with us and check out full unedited conversations, photos, interviews, video interviews, plus other goodies on YouTube or Instagram at Driven to Ride Podcast. Or you can check us out at driventoridepodcast.com. And make sure you leave us a rating and review from wherever you get your podcasts too. If you have an idea for an episode or a guest, or you want to invite us out on an adventure, email us hello@driventoridepodcast.com. Driven to Ride is wholly owned by Flint Rock LLC, made possible with help from Matthew Miles, and written, hosted, and produced by me, Mark Long. We'll see you out there.